Well, what's up, getting there, guys? Brian here at 3TR, here to bring you another end of the year top 10 list video. Now that we got the top 10 worst movies I saw this year video done, it's time to jump into the top 10 best movies that I saw in 2016. Now, starting off real simple with number 10, I picked 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi, directed by Michael Bay. And this was a pretty surprising film for me to see, because I personally didn't know too much about the events that happened during that day. But I think that Michael Bay did a pretty solid job at being very respectful towards the material and respectful for the soldiers and individuals that were kind of lost their lives that night. I think that the action had that pretty typical Michael Bay flair, and I think it's a proof example that when Michael Bay is given the right type of script that can play towards the strength in terms of the type of action movies that he's really good at, he can produce a pretty well-directed, well-visualized, and stylized action movie, and I think that's what 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi really was. So, surprisingly, Michael Bay did a pretty good movie, and that's why it's number 10 on this list. Going on into number 9, I picked The Magnificent Seven. Now, I think this is more of an updated, stylized Western type of movie. I think that Denzel Washington and Chris Pratt are without question the strongest actors in this film. Could have developed the other 5 members of the Magnificent Seven better. They could have had a much better villain. I think that the final third act, where all the action is getting all crazy and it kind of has that Last Stand type of vibe, I think fits pretty well. And I think overall it's kind of an example of what a modern day Western would be. It doesn't quite have that old classic feeling to it, but I don't think that style would work too well in the modern day era. So I think that it did a really good job at telling a modern day up-to-date style of a Western, and that's why it's number 9 on this list. And going into number 8 is also kind of somewhat similar, but I think did a better job, and that happens to be Jane's Got a Gun. Now, this movie had been in production hell for a good while, so I was actually a bit surprised that I caught this on Netflix, because I didn't know this actually came out in wide release in January. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed this movie. This was probably the biggest surprise of the year, because I was just really concerned. And I have to say that looking at the cast, I don't know if this was done on purpose or it was just coincidence, but outside of Star Wars, this is probably the greatest Star Wars reunion movie I've ever seen, especially involving prequel characters. I thought that Natalie Portman really did a really good job of her character at really portraying the type of strong female protagonist that I think we should see more in much bigger budget films. I thought that Ewan McGregor did a really good job kind of playing, I don't want to say he was a pimp, but he kind of was a handler of prostitutes in a sense. I thought that Joel Edgerton did a pretty good job at kind of being the type of rough, beaten down character that he was. And I think having that last stand element of the movie's plot did a really great job, because you really are concerned about Natalie Portman's character and Joel Edgerton's character as they're trapped in this house as a bunch of these bounty hunters are trying to kill them. And I think that, without question, if you get a chance to check this out on Netflix, I think it's still there, definitely check this out, because it really was surprising, which is why it's number 8 on this list. Going into number 7, we start getting to the science fiction part of my list, and we have Star Wars Rogue One. Now, this being the first kind of side movie for the standard saga of Star Wars films, I think it did a pretty good job at kind of adding a little bit more information going into A New Hope. I think it handled Darth Vader, at least his second main appearance, very, very well. I'm not sure about his first. I think that the characters, for the most part, they were good for what they were meant to do. And I really did appreciate the use of CGI that they had. I thought the last third of the film was just absolutely excellent. And I think it added a new layer of really showing what the galaxy is like when we focus on not necessarily like second tier characters, but characters that you wouldn't consider as main plot characters. So we're not really focusing on Jedi. Just what would the world of Star Wars be through the eyes of someone who is not really considered to be incredibly powerful and is just a normal person. I think it really did a good job telling a story from that point of view, and how these characters that may not be very significant, but what they did plays a big role in the wider scale of the Star Wars saga. And I thought it handled that very, very well. And I really want to see what they do with the Han Solo movie coming out, I believe, in 2 years. Going into number 6 is the other stall franchise, and that is Star Trek Beyond. Now, despite what some people feel, I actually really liked the reboot to Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness. I really enjoyed that. So going into Beyond, I was, had my expectations because the third installment of these new franchises just doesn't usually do that well. But Star Trek Beyond was pretty good. I think it took it back to a much more traditional type of Star Trek movie, because we don't spend too much time on the Enterprise itself. And I think seeing the crew in such a vulnerable situation, I really think made me care more about the characters. The one thing that I think at this point Star Trek has over Star Wars is that it has a much more likable cast of characters than I think Star Wars does. Star Wars is still trying to win me over, which it's failing just terribly at. But I really do like the crew of the Enterprise. I mean, just seeing what they've been through since the remake in 2009 and then Star Trek Beyond, and then to see them continue on, I think it has probably the best chemistry of any cast of characters that I've seen in a science fiction franchise to date. And I think that the villain could have been obviously a little bit better handled, but I think that the action was definitely very impressive, especially the last third, which, it has that kind of, fast pace, we gotta move or else everyone's gonna die type of vibe. But I think it was very entertaining and quite enjoyable, and that's why it's where it's at on my list. Going on into number 5 is probably going to shock a lot of you guys, but let me explain. And that is Captain America Civil War. Now look, I know people really like this film, and I do too. The problem I had with Captain America Civil War is that there's just no suspense. Going into this, you know that no one is any in real danger, and I kind of think that the idea of civil war is a bit misleading, because when you hear the term war, you're kind of expecting a really serious situation, when I think this should have been called Captain America Civil Disagreement. I mean, don't get me wrong, the action scenes are great. I think introducing these new characters that are going to get their own standalone films is great, because I'm really pumped up for Spider-Man Homecoming coming out next year, and especially Black Panther. I mean, their introductions I think were very well handled, and I think finally seeing the major clash between Captain America's forces and Iron Man's forces was very well handled. I just think that it didn't really have a really great villain, and I think that it kind of sets up as one major setup film for the next installment, which has always been a major weakness of these Marvel Cinematic Universe films, that they're so focused on setting up the next film that they can't tell the best film that they can at the moment. But overall, it was great. It was very well acted, directed, it had a great script, not so much a great villain, which is kind of a trait of these Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. But overall, I think it kind of sits dead center in the middle, because it did give me everything I wanted, but that wasn't really much to ask for. But still, great film. Definitely a major installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is why it's number 5 on my list. Going on to number 4, I picked Hacksaw Ridge. Now, I'm a huge history buff fan, and especially involving anything involving World War II. So the fact that they were able to tell a story of this really historic hero who was actually able to do what he did and not carry a gun, or as far as I know didn't fire a single round, which that was the legend, I think told a very inspirational story, especially in this terrible time. And I think that this was probably, in my opinion, Andrew Garfield's, or at least for me, it's probably my favorite performance from him, and probably Mel Gibson's best movie that he's made to date. I mean, he's a pretty solid director when given the right type of material, and I think that in a story environment like this one, it really paid off in a very big sense. I could absolutely see this movie winning a bunch of awards, and I came out of the movie feeling even better about these type of stories that involve these characters that necessarily aren't known for what they did on the battlefield in terms of a violent sense, but just wanting to save lives, because heck, in a war, that's very hard to do, and that's why I picked it number 4 on my list. Going into number 3, I picked Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Now, obviously, I grew up with Harry Potter, so the fact that this is kind of going into a new genre of Wizarding World movies had me a little bit on the fence of whether or not it was going to work, but it paid off pretty well. This is actually kind of the first Wizarding World movie I could say I went into without knowing any prior information, because as far as I know, there's not an official novel. I know that the title of the movie is based off a textbook that students from Hogwarts need to have in order to go into Hogwarts. So going into this movie, I felt fairly blind. And I think that it did a very good job at really establishing more information about how the wizarding world works, especially now that we are now telling the story in America. I think it added a couple of elements involving a new dark wizard that we knew not too much about in the original set of Harry Potter books. And I think that moving forward, I think that the main character might have a part in terms of giving him more depth. But overall, I think that what this movie does is it proves that you can actually tell a story and expand it and have it work very well, as long as you have a good cast, good directing, and a good script. And I think that's what it did very well, and that's why Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them is number 3 on my list. Now, going on to the last two, which was definitely the hardest to determine, because one I was very highly anticipating would work out, and one, once I saw the trailer, I knew it was probably the one movie that probably could take the number 1 spot. And it was going to be a battle between Deadpool and Doctor Strange. But unfortunately, Deadpool takes number 2. This was the perfect fan film. This movie had been asked for years, and this is a perfect example that although Fox may stumble in terms of its X-Men films, when they listen to your fans and you give us what we want and you make the movie the way it should be, you will prosper. The people and the fans will praise this film. Even people who weren't fans of Deadpool became fans of Deadpool after seeing this film. Ryan Reynolds was the perfect choice of Deadpool, not just an X-Men of Wolverine Origins, which was, he was maybe one of the bright things, before they sewed his mouth shut. But I think that it did a very good job at giving us some new life into Fox's X-Men brand, because it is much needed, especially after what happened with X-Men Apocalypse. But I'm really pumped up to see Deadpool 2, which we all know is coming. I just really hope that moving forward they are able to kind of give us more of what we loved without making it feel too stale. Because this movie was great. The action was great. The humor is great. The breaking the fourth wall was great. Ryan Reynolds is just an amazing comedic actor, and it really gave us everything we want. It is the perfect fan film, and that is why it's number 2 on this list. And going into number 1 is Doctor Strange. This was probably the one film I thought would really change the game in terms of how the Marvel Cinematic Universe's movie styles are told. Because this is the only movie I saw this year that I saw in 3D, and I feel that you need to see this movie in 3D. Its visuals are this probably has the best visuals I've seen of any movie to date. I think that Benedict Cumberbatch's performance as Stephen Strange was absolutely wonderful. This is another example of perfect casting. I thought that its explanations of how magic in this world works was great. And I thought the twist at the end of how he dealt with the main primary antagonist, I thought was very, very clever. What this movie did better than any movie that I saw this year was it was able to tell a new type of story that is set in an already established cinematic universe using the best visuals that I've ever seen with a great cast. And what's more is that despite telling a familiar origin-like type story, it still had me on the edge of my seat, which is something I can't say I was with any film I saw this year. And that is why Doctor Strange is my number 1 favorite movie of 2016 and my movie of the year. Now, I'd like to know, what were the top 10 best movies that you saw this year? Share your list with me and everybody else in the comments down below. And if you like this video, feel free to like, comment down below, and please subscribe to check out my future videos. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you next time.